To you, God, I pray, God, that we just honor you through the preaching of the word, and that our hearts would be open to hear from you, and to respond and be receptive to what you're saying to each and every one of us and to this church family. Thank you for this time together, and honor you in Jesus' name. So, it's called Culture of Honor, #NoFilter. So you might take a guess that I'm going to talk a little bit about our culture today. And, you know, we're in modern times, and I want to just take a survey of how many of you use social media on a daily basis. Yeah, most of us, right? And then how many of you have, like, a love-hate relationship with social media? I definitely do. Okay, we're honest people. So if you see those, I didn't even know what that middle one was because I don't use Snapchat, but I figured that's probably what it was because I know it's kind of like people in their 20s maybe who use it more than people in their 30s. But YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, I don't really know about LinkedIn being, I know it's LinkedIn, but I rarely use it. And then of course Snapchat and Facebook. So there's all these different social media platforms. And then one of the things that social media has brought, I guess, is this whole word community, right? Like, it's been a buzzword over the last decade, I think, more so than before, even though we've always had local communities, right? Our neighborhoods and the communities that we live in. But so many more new communities have popped up recently, like sporting communities, young professional communities. There's like a community for every kind of subculture there is out there. And so this hashtag or buzzword has been pretty up all over the place on social media. And because of something called Instagram, I don't know if I would be proud to call myself a hashtagger, but some of you may have been on the receiving end of my conversations over chat and also in person where I hashtag a lot. I'm not super proud of it. Again, I have a love-hate relationship with social media. So hashtagging, you know, I kind of like the fact that you can sum up a photo with hashtags and you kind of can make a joke through hashtags. And I was reading up about like what the point of hashtags is anyway. And some of the things that came up were pretty obvious, like it's to stand out from like the millions of users on a certain platform. But there's actually, you know, like a reason for it, like for the Instagram or whatever social media algorithm, it favors like posts that have more hashtags, if that makes sense. So if you have at least one hashtag on a photo, you have like 10%, 12% more of that post being liked or seen than a post that's without. And so if your goal is to be seen and known, then you hashtag like crazy. I think they limit to you, this isn't that important, but they have a limit. I think it's like 30 per post. I don't know if any of you have ever gone up to 30. It's kind of hard, but it's kind of stretching it too. So anyway, so something like Instagram or the social media, like there's a lot of things that you've seen from these social media platforms that kind of get this community vibe like in the app and the network itself. And so there's like the sharing of a post, the tagging of a post, and you know these hashtags. So the thing that something like Instagram has implemented in their hashtag strategies to actually increase community involvement or engagement, which if you think about it, there is a sort of engagement up to a certain level when you're online, right? And they really seek to build this strong community online. And that means, you know, they're providing valuable content. Like on Instagram now, they have all those ads that pop up because they're things that you may have looked at or liked that are relevant to you. So that's one of the things that they've kind of thrown in there to just make it more engaging, even if it's kind of annoying at times. Because they really want to involve like this dialogue or this two-way conversation or relationship through this online community. But I have a few photos to show you, just things that you've probably seen. One of my favorites from The Struggle Is Real, me after adulting all day. And then there's another one, next one, that you've probably seen a lot on Instagram. They're just like very picturesque photos in the background, and then it's like a thing to like have your back towards the camera. So I kind of got sucked into it. I'm making fun of myself here, because whether I like it or not, I'm part of the social media online community. And some of the things, it's just like so not true. Like that's definitely not how I live authentically. Me posing on a rock in my back, or me jumping into a tree. And you've all been there, right? You're like taking a photo, you're like, okay, how about now? Like, where should I turn now? And the person taking the photo is like put your leg up or turn this way or whatever. So there's nothing really that authentic about it. But the hashtags are there, and I get a kick out of that. So anyway, I'm saying that to poke fun at myself, and we're in this world, we're in it and of it, not of the world, but in this social media online community. And so I'm not knocking it at all, but I'm acknowledging that while social media seeks to form this kind of connection among whatever subculture, whatever people group is using it, I don't think we can settle for that level of connection, right? Just being online. There's definitely a lot of benefits to social media and technology. I get to talk to my family back home or friends far away, right? But I think it also has, to a certain degree, made me kind of settle for one level of connection or even disconnection with people right in front of me, because I'm like on my phone all the time. So I want to talk a little bit about how, as socially connected we may feel, we're actually rather socially disconnected in our time. And I was reading up about how this generation has this rising epidemic of loneliness, and that may sound kind of intense. But there was an article written last year by the former US Surgeon General about this epidemic of loneliness in the Harvard Business Review. And he's saying how, like what I was just saying, that there's all these studies about social scientists and think tanks that are saying this generation is becoming more and more socially disconnected than ever, and how loneliness really isn't about being alone, it's about not feeling connected. So I have some statistics if you want to hear them. I don't have them up there, but I thought it was pretty interesting just to consider before we go into talking about friendship. How they're saying it's actually a growing health epidemic, and that we live, that there's rates of loneliness have doubled since the 1980s. And over 40% of adults in America report feeling lonely, and maybe the real number may be higher. Loneliness and weak social connections are associated with a reduction in lifespan, similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity. It's also been linked to some risks of health, like cardiovascular disease, dementia, depression, and anxiety. And at work, loneliness can reduce the task performance and even kind of limit or stifle your creativity, impairing other aspects of executive functioning like decision making and reasoning. So that's not to be like, wah wah, I don't want you dwelling on loneliness, but just kind of thinking that in the context of what we're going to be talking about today. And did you know, I found it really crazy, but maybe a jumpstart times, that in the UK they appointed a minister of loneliness, minister for loneliness this past year in January. Like there's actually someone in Parliament that is taking care of what they call this sad reality of modern life, and I feel like that's probably a really tough job, but that was directly from the Prime Minister in appointing this woman to her Parliament, or I don't know what they call it, cabinet. So all that to say, I want to talk a little bit about friendship. And like I was drawn to the connection and the deep level of intimacy that David and Jonathan had, and we're going to see that in the Bible as we look at social connection, community engagement. This was highlighted to me. So before we get there, there's the definition of a friend or friendship, and this is from the dictionary. Friendship simply is defined by the dictionary as the quality or state of being friends, and that can be a very vague definition. But when I looked into what being a friend is, the dictionary says, one attached to another by affection or esteem. It can be an acquaintance. It can be simply one who is not hostile or a favored companion. So even that definition of friend there's a range of it. And in a similar way in the Bible, there's a lot of different definitions for a friend in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. I chose the most common words from the Bible in the New Testament, philos, which is friend, and also adelphos, adelphi, which is more like a kin relationship between brother or sister. And what's really interesting that I found about friendship in the Bible, there's 3 components that you'll see throughout. There's either just association only, so someone like when Jesus talked to Judas, one of his followers, he said, friend, do what you came here to do, when Judas was about to betray him. Or in the parable of the 10 virgins, the wedding guests, that Jesus turns away, he's like, I never even knew you. So that was just association, maybe people that you're just around, but you don't actually really know. And then there's association and loyalty, which is something like a king's friend, like Caesar, when he had to make the decision to prosecute or lead Jesus to the cross or to hand him over or set him free. They were saying to Caesar, are you a friend of the king? Because anyone who isn't a friend of the king is an enemy. And so that kind of shows that relationship there. And then finally is the highest level of friendship, which is association plus loyalty plus affection. And that's the kind of friend that the Bible says that sticks closer than a brother. And that's the friendship that we're going to look at today through David and Jonathan. So I hope that's helpful. We're going to go into the Word in 1 Samuel 18. If you want, you can read it together. If not, it's okay. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So it may be helpful just to understand the context of this passage. This was right after David had won against the enemy Goliath. And so David had come out of being a shepherd, and he stood up against this really threatening, enemy, this huge giant Goliath, and he really defended Israel and exalted God. He said, to the enemy, you come with a sword and spear, but I come in the name of the Lord. And he's like, that God is going to hand you over to Israel. And so he had such bravery and courageous faith as he faced his enemy. And so when we come upon this passage, it says that as soon as he was finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And I was wondering, that it happened right after David was speaking to Saul about what had just happened. And I was like, what exactly was it that knit David to Jonathan's soul? And I wonder if it's because Jonathan, he had also been very brave in the face of enemies. He and his armor bearer, which is just like a loyal, not just an aide, but a loyal partner in battle, they faced their enemies single-handedly and also stood up courageously to defeat their enemy there. And so I wonder if it was because Jonathan had heard David talking to Saul, his father, and heard of David's courage and his faith in God, and how perhaps, Jonathan just knew, we have the same heart, we have that same connection on a deep level, and so I'm going to really seek after this person as a friend. Because he saw that maybe David had the same trust in his relationship with God. And so I believe that Jonathan really recognized David's love for God, but also they had the same level of connection in their heart. And so I think Jonathan really took that initiative to seek David out. And that's one of the things I think really important as we're thinking about building community, that oftentimes, even in my own life, I'm like, when are people gonna come, or like, how am I gonna make friends or whatever? But really it does take initiative, and it does take risk even to experience authentic community. And so it does require initiative, and that to really have this sense of seeking out. And I don't think it has to do with how we're wired as far as like being an introvert or extrovert. To experience authentic community, I have here, requires initiative. Passivity is the enemy of deep friendship. So maybe, I don't know if you're here today and you're like, how do I really develop deep friendship or close friendship? When I look at David and Jonathan, and even from the Bible, there's a lot of scripture on friends, on what it means to be a friend. And it says in Proverbs, a man who has friends must himself be a friend and be friendly. I would ask us to consider even something that Charles Spurgeon, he was a British preacher, he said, any man can selfishly desire to have a Jonathan, but he is on the right track who desires to find a David to whom he can be a Jonathan first. And so as we look into this relationship, maybe just we can keep that in mind of, David may kind of take the spotlight in the Bible, like, oh, I want to be like David, a heart after God, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at what David faces and who he becomes as king, he would have never gotten there without Jonathan and his friendship there. So in this scripture, it may seem like, man, their friendship just happened in the blink of an eye. Jonathan just heard David talking to his dad, and he's like, oh, I want to be his friend. But I think it's symbolic in that he does take the initiative. He goes and he lays down all his armor. He gives David his robe, his sword, his bow, even. And he's just, I think, basically being that friend that says, I'll give you the shirt off of my back. You've heard that term before. And so he literally does that and makes him even vulnerable to David, not knowing really how David would react. But as you see in the verse, they continue just to do life together. And so there's this really beautiful symbolism in Jonathan giving his robe and all that to David, because Jonathan is son of the king, firstborn son of the king. David is the lastborn of a farmer. And Jonathan's basically saying, I know that God has anointed you as the future king, and I'm willing to just lay down my own pride, my position, and to give that to you, recognizing that my inheritance is not mine, it's yours. I think that's really powerful, that kind of sacrifice. So the Bible talks about different kinds of, like friends who love in all kinds of weather, and it made me think of how maybe we talk about in church, like iron sharpening iron. Have you all heard that before? Yeah, so here's a picture of iron sharpening iron. Maybe you can go to the next one. Yeah, so before actually looking at that, I quoted that scripture a lot. Iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. And it sounds really edifying, I even had a small group called Iron Group before, and you just get together, you're edifying, you're challenging each other. But when you look at that picture, it's like, there's a lot happening there, and there's heat, and things are being chipped away, and it's very close. It doesn't maybe seem as pleasant as, the scripture may sound, but I think that's exactly what it looks like when you're in a relationship where you're giving and you're getting and you're close to each other, that there's some kind of friction and there's heat in the middle of it, right? And so there's a lot that we face in relationships that, due to whatever heat that may be, it sharpens us. So when I was going to say little, but no, when I was just younger, I would kind of shy away from that kind of closeness, even though I desired to be in really more connected friendships. I think all of us do at some level, right? But I would get really shy or even nervous when I would have to confront that friend or even be on the receiving end of what my friend would say, because it's not that pleasant all the time to hear words, but the Bible says, it's better to hear a rebuke from a friend than the kisses of an enemy, right? It's deceitful. And so there's a lot of things that I think I've learned from friendship that I'll share as we go through this, and maybe it's bringing up things for you too, but how that iron sharpening iron, there's this mutual edification, and I think that's part of what had Jonathan and David really walk together in their life. So Jonathan, I would call like a 2 a.m. friend, and if you think about like friends that you would always pick up the phone, you don't screen them, right? Or you take their calls. They're just people that that they'll come to your defense, and they speak well of you, and also they're there for you in times of crisis. And when Jonathan made this covenant with David, you see that even when Saul was seeking to kill David multiple times, Jonathan rose up in his defense. In 1 Samuel 19, Saul is just, we're going to get to him, but he was out really to get David, and Jonathan went to his father and spoke well of David to Saul. And so even Jonathan's loyalty to David, it surpassed his own loyalty to his father because of that covenant. And so it says that Jonathan said, "Don't let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause?" And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." So there's this evidence of 2 a.m. friendship when Jonathan even put himself there between his father and his good friend, right? And he's like, I'm going to come to my friend's defense, and I'm going to just see, what my father's thinking. And he convinces his dad to not seek out innocent blood because David hasn't done anything, but Saul has in his mind that, David's next in line, and, he's just afraid, basically. And so David is on the run, and he has the king after him. But you see that many times throughout this scripture, Jonathan just comes over and he says at one point that he strengthens his hand in God. And he tells Jonathan, don't fear, don't fear, because even though my dad is after you, he's not going to find you. David, you're going to be king. He affirms him. He just speaks life into him. And they made another covenant before God in that way. So it's solidifying their friendship all the more. And I think that God really put Jonathan in David's life in this crucial time in his journey to the throne. And like I said earlier, if they didn't have this covenant relationship and this bond on the level, David really wouldn't have been able to overcome the different obstacles he's faced during Saul's reign. And so I think the same is true for all of us. Like in order to really kind of do life, I look at like who's in my corner. If I'm out, I look back and I'm like, who's in my corner, who's cheering me on, who's encouraging me, and also challenging me and correcting me and putting me in my place if I'm out of line or whatever. And I think all of us can kind of do that assessment in our life, like who's in my corner. Even though I'm facing the world or facing all these challenges, I have people that are backing me up and really doing life with me. And so it's really true for all of us. Like, we're not going to be able to reach our maximum spiritual potential without the help of these key relationships in our life that God has placed in us. And I know it takes trust, it takes time to develop that. You can't just drift into community. You do have to take initiative. You do need to be intentional. And it's not to say that we need to go deep with everybody, but you can with a few, and that's what I think this is really about. And at the end of this, I think the friendship between these two men, it's truly a picture of honor. And that may be something not all of us know I know for myself, when I think about like my grandfather's time, and even in our culture, like honor in many cultures is really serious. You know, we take it very seriously. It's not something taken lightly. And I believe with these two men, there's really people who are putting themselves before the other and laying their lives down and empowering each other, of course. But they're really working together to not just meet one another's needs, but they're working for the same goal. And so honor, I think, also is this practice of calling out the best in another person, whether it's speaking praise or correction. And we can see that through this friendship here. So I want to encourage us, to really begin or continue to see each other the way that God sees them. I think that has been something very pivotal in my key relationships, especially like when there's iron sharpening iron and there's that closeness. It's easy also to just see the other person in our own flesh, our own ways, or you just assume things too. But as we do life together, it's really important to seek out God's perspective over all of that. And I think that's part of honoring and loving God first, but then also pursuing God with the people around us to have that really deep connection with each other. So, you guys okay? As we talk about Jonathan and David, there's also David and Saul. And I hashtag that, the struggle is real, even though it's not on one line there. It's such a huge contrast to David's relationship with Jonathan. And I want to share that with you because I think it's important, right, to look at the different relationships that we all have, and it's not always easy, and so there can be a struggle. If you go back to that scripture where David was making a covenant with Jonathan, Saul had assigned David to be a leader over the men of war. And so it said that David continued to behave wisely no matter what he faced. And he actually grew in popularity. So he became so popular that he kind of surpassed Saul's popularity. And so people were saying, Saul has his thousands, but David has his 10,000s. And Saul just got really angry as soon as he heard that and became really insecure as king. And he responds to all that saying, what more can David have with the kingdom? And then it says that he eyed David from that day forward. He eyed David from that day forward. And he also became afraid of David. Why did he become afraid of him? Because the Lord was with him. But Saul knew that the Lord had already departed from him, his spirit. So there's this thing of fear and also insecurity that is like weighing on Saul, that is now like driving his relationship with David. And he became more concerned with hanging on to his power and his throne than really focusing on God and seeking him. And I think that made the real difference between his relationship, because he knew that his days on the throne were numbered. He knew that David was going to be the king, but he's just really insecure, and he begins to be really suspicious of David and his motives, even though throughout the word he's saying, David just continued to do his thing and behave really wisely. Saul just really wanted to kill him and seek his life. So there's this thing of like assigning these motives or assuming motives, right, that I was saying, and then that's what Saul was doing. He was just saying, David must be like awful and whatever, and so I just need to like go after him, even though David was doing nothing of that sort. He was continuing to honor him. So I think this relationship really points out this battle between love and between fear that a lot of us can face in relationships. So there's this book here that I was reading. It's called Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk, and it has a lot of psychology to it, but it's about connection, communication, and boundaries. And it says that in reaction to like any threat of pain that we may experience, there's a tendency to either fight, to flight or freeze, right? So we're either gonna like confront it and there's gonna be like some kind of conflict, or there's a tendency to just peace out and leave, or you just get paralyzed and you're freezing. But all those three things, the same goal is distance. And so when you think about how you react, how do you react to different experiences that are hurtful or painful? Maybe it's by controlling something, or manipulating, or even withholding love. And so when it talks about this battle between fear and love, when the goal of a relationship is to connect or to preserve relationship, I think all of us need to learn how to respond in love instead of react with, fighting or flighting or freezing. Because when we can actually learn how to respond, when you react to something, maybe you don't even think, right? Like, just react. There's no time. You're just reacting without thinking. But when you have to respond, you actually have to train your mind to think, and you have to choose in your will to do something, and then your body also needs to obey. So there's a lot of things that fall in line when you kind of learn how to respond instead of reacting. Does that make sense? So, like in my life, I talk about my relationship with my dad a lot because we're close. I had a lot of stuff that I had to deal with him, but one of them was just how impatient that I was always towards him. And maybe you heard me say that before, but my reaction to him, even if it wasn't something in the moment, it triggered a lot of like my past experiences with him. And so I would just react with so much impatience and frustration towards him. And as God kind of put that on my heart to really see him the way that he does and love him, I've had to learn to respond differently, not just immediately react out of my flesh in impatience or frustration, but to learn to respond lovingly and to hear him and to just love him and see him the way that God does. And that's just one example out of a lot that I could actually give about relationships. But I hope that makes sense, like really learning to respond in love. The Bible says that we don't have a spirit of fear, but one of power, one of love, and a sound mind. And that's a scripture that I've said over and over again to myself because I've dealt with a lot of fear, but in the context of friendships, of relationship, if we have a spirit of love, we also have power and a sound mind, which means if we have fear, that's actually powerless and it's a divisive mind. And when I thought of how extremely different they are, it made me think of how these two things can't coexist in a person. It can't coexist in a friendship or even in a culture, because fear will drive you to disconnect and distance yourself, but love will connect, and love will be the one that bonds, right? And so these things can't coexist in us. When you think about God's perfect love for us, right? Like his perfect love is powerful, it is fearless, and he's always the one that's pursuing us and really closing that gap, that distance that was once there because of sin, right, in our lives. And so he's always moving toward us in that and responding to us with love and giving us this choice to love him back. He never takes that choice away. When it comes to relationships, I know that many of us, if not all of us, have different hurts or pain that we have from other friendships in the past that can kind of be carried into our present or future friendships, right? I think, like, as I was preparing this, I really felt like unforgiveness and offense was one thing that I needed to address. And this isn't to point anything out at anybody, but something that I think that is really important for any of us in our relationships and ultimately with our relationship with God. Many of you may have heard of this book called The Bait of Satan by John Bevere. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. Yes? No? It's a really good book. It says, the subtitle is Living Freely from the Deadly Trap of Offense. And, offense, not offense. Says offense, he uses this example in the book about offense being like an animal trap. And I don't really know anything about animal traps, but the example that he gave was that for a trap to work, it has to be hidden and it has to be baited to lure the animal. But the trap in and of itself isn't dangerous, it's not deadly, but it becomes deadly when it's picked up or used. So that's what he says is equivalent to like offense. When we carry offense in our hearts, the fruit of it can be anger, it can be hurt, jealousy, outrage, resentment, bitterness, envy, and there's all these consequences that come out of it when we go into another into the friendship. And that can be just a lot of wounding or even insults, attacks, division, separation, betrayal, even backsliding in our faith. So when we talk about offense, there's this word in the Bible called scandalon, and its original meaning means that you're held prisoner or like a captive, and that's what offense does to us. It keeps us captive. When it comes to forgiveness or unforgiveness, a lot of the time we think that, if I don't forgive someone and I just think I'm right or whatever, like I'm holding that against them, like there's something, it's not about me, it's about them. But in reality, when we carry unforgiveness, we're actually the ones that are trapped. We're actually the ones that are held prisoner to that. And so there's a really powerful thing between offense and unforgiveness and being able to first receive forgiveness, but also ask and receive forgiveness from the other person. Let me talk a little bit about, more personally, I guess, for us as a church, because I feel like a lot of us on the staff and even leaders, we've been just really excited too about where God is bringing us as a church. And I think like we're not just a church on Sundays, but we're a church of people. And I think where God's calling us into in this season is really investing in relationships more and connecting more. And I wouldn't want any of us to like give into whatever bait or whatever thing that the enemy is putting in front of us, but to really seek out first and foremost God, but then how He's placed us here in this spiritual family. And I think that when we're talking about like David and Jonathan, it's not just a story that we can feel good about and be like, yeah, I believe that in my life, but to kind of take that in our lives and see like, okay, who can I be a Jonathan to, or how can I really connect with people beyond the surface? It takes a lot, and I think we may have a tendency, from our past experiences to want to be more fearful or passive, and want to just kind of distance ourselves if we, may feel offended or if for any other reason. But I want to just kind of encourage us all the more to seek out what it means to really connect with one another and to build a sense of deeper community. And so when we get really close in relationships, I think there's more at risk, right? I know in my life, the closest relationships are the ones that probably can hurt me the most because they matter the most. They're the most significant, and there have been probably all of my closest friendships to date. There have always been like a time where we've had to communicate each other's needs or like clarify things, and a few of them, like there were periods of times where like we wouldn't even have such like communication because maybe for me, like I felt like I was right about something, or like I was prideful or whatever, and like it really distanced or disconnected me from that friend, and it really took God, of course, but both of us to really see each other the way that God does, but take the initiative on both of our halves and really seek out the other person and making a connection to each other. And I think like that's what I'm trying to communicate is like really responding to each other in love. And when it comes to something like offense, like if we hold on to that, it can really, how we respond to it can really determine what we do next. Like it can determine our future, it can determine our next steps in that friendship or in other relationships. So with David and Saul, David, like, he stood and behaved wisely throughout the whole time, right? He continued to honor Saul, even when he had a chance to kill Saul, he didn't. And then he even proved, he's like, I had a chance to kill you, but I know that God has anointed you and I'm not going to bring my hand upon you. Whereas Saul, because he was so insecure or prideful or fearful, he had assumed all these motives and put them on David. And he had his eyes off of the Lord. And so he reacted and he was trying to just kind of save himself. And so I think with our relationships and who we're at, there's this response that we need first, like in our heart before God, but then also with one another as we're building, as we're seeking each other out in a deeper level of friendship. So I want to just kind of ask a few people to come up as Gabby, you three, come on up. Because they can, I asked them to share a little bit about their relationship, their faith, but also how these three, plus Susanna, but she's on PowerPoint, how just even in these few months, like what community means to them in their relationship with God and with one another. Oh yeah, we have Purple Book Group together just through the last few months, since January? March. Okay, go.
Okay, I'm first. Okay, so when Bertina first came to me, telling me that there was going to be a Purple Book Group, I was like excited, but a little like apprehensive, because I was like, I wonder who's going to be like the members, and then she like told me who was gonna be in the group, and it was Belle, Jasmine, and Susanna. And I was like, okay, like I've seen them at church, like I like say hi to them occasionally, but I was like, I don't think we'll probably be friends, cause yeah. But I was like, and then so like when girls started and I got to know them more, I realized I was like, oh, maybe we really won't be like close friends, because like we had a lot of different like personalities, and we just had just different temperaments. And I was like, I don't think any of my like friends from high school or like college, like they always just got along. So I was like, I don't like this feeling of friction. And I was like, probably don't want to hang out with them as much. But then God just reminded me to like how that I was prideful and how I looked at the people I wanted to be friends with, and I already had these expectations in my head. I was like, okay, they have to be more like me, they have to think more like me, and like act more like me. But then God was like, no, like how, like you're not honoring them as how, like, and you're not looking at them as how He sees us. And then you know how God created man. He just reminded me how God created mankind in His image and as image bearers of Christ as well. And because God placed so much value and honor upon us, I was like, I don't want to like not dishonor God by looking at other people and having these expectations, my own expectations, and not seeing them and placing value and priority on them as God would. So then that just really, like God just reminded me about that. And so by that, He just removed my like prideful lenses, I would say. And so after that, I started seeing them more as, you know, like nobody's perfect and I'm not perfect and we just all need Jesus. And so I was like, yeah, maybe we should just, like try to like not like get along with them. It's okay if we have like these instances where we don't agree with each other, because like that's not what's important. What's important is that we all grow to know and like know God more and like just love each other more. So yeah, and now as I depart from Boston, I'm gonna be really sad because all my close friends won't be there anymore. But yeah, so God just really reminds me that when it comes to people who we meet or find like difficult to get along with, like we should always be reminded that He sees us, He honors, He sees us in a way that we have good like high value, and so yeah, that's what my testimony is for this friendship. So Jasmine.
Hello, my name is Jasmine, and I would like to share that how groups changed me, changed my mind, and knowing the truth more. And I used to not have this kind of small group, and that's why it is so hard for me to abiding the relationship in church and with other people, and then it's so difficult for me to face the weakness on the way of being Christian, and also I didn't have the courage to share the gospel with new people. Yeah, and because I always think that I don't know much like detail or truth about the Bible, and I'm so afraid that I'm not good enough to share the gospel with people. Yeah. And after coming to Bertina's group, and I got the opportunity to know more Christian friends like Susanna and Belle and also Harry. Yeah. And although we came from like different background, different study, and totally different personality, but because of God, we met each other in a small group, and I started to read Bible more often and pray for each other. And it really gave me the courage to share gospel and work with God. And it released my fear and my group, and I know that my group will support my path. And so I encourage you guys to have a small group to buy the relationship with group, and because it is truly a grace from God. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm back. But this is my last Sunday. So I just want to share about my experience here. So when I arrived Taiwan, I just came here Every Nation because I came from Every Nation. But then at the same time, I also had like certain my expectations, too idealistic maybe. But I had some from my previous experiences, I was in that state of maybe I'll find the same group here. But then of course every experience is different, right? God just uses these experiences to grow us, to prune us, and just mold our character. And so the same as Ari said, when I first met the group, I wasn't sure whether would really get along. But then these are the people I knew I would have to work with or grow with, stay here in Taiwan and live that life of the exchange student or international student. And then I actually came to a point where I guess my eyes were just not that really focused on God, but on my personal preferences, and I considered like transferring to a different church. So I looked into different churches in around like near me, and even went as far as to like visiting those churches and checking if I could move there and just see how it goes. But then I knew that I was also praying at that time and asking God like, Lord, do you want me to stay in this church or do you want me to move to a different one? I knew that I have that free will, and I could just make my own decisions. But then I also didn't want to risk my relationship with God. I didn't want to make a decision at the expense of my relationship with God. Like what Bertina shared and what happened to Saul. And then it was tough. It was tough at that time. Like, okay, I know I can't stay in this like the church I visited, which I really liked. Like, okay, I know I can't be here. I'm supposed to be somewhere else. And so when I came back here, I was like dragging myself. But then I was just, okay, Lord, this has to be. I need to go through this by and with your grace. It's not something that I just force myself to come here every week, serve here every week, and it's not something that I can fake. So it's either I allow God to work in my heart, or I just leave or do something else. And then I'm really grateful. Like, I thank God every day for the grace that He has given me, even for changing the way I see things. Because if I didn't just pray or ask Him to change my heart, I know that I myself am incapable of changing the way I think and the way I feel. And then I'm really grateful for just obeying and listening to like what's written on His Word, because after like this 2 semesters of being here in Taiwan and serving in this church and growing with these girls I didn't expect to get along with. Or like I call them covenant friends or covenant sisters. I know I can run to them and tell them anything. I know that for some things they may not, we may not have the same standard beliefs at the moment, but then I know that they would use the word correctly, like in telling me whether they would encourage me or tell me I'm wrong. They're just there to support one another. So yeah, I love our group. If you're a university student and you live here, like you go to NTU or NTNU, yes, shameless plug, please join the group. Yeah, thank you.
Susanna got an excuse because she's doing PowerPoint, but she does. Anyway. No, I'm gonna put it on the spot. Yeah, so for what these girls shared, like, I don't know if some of you are thinking like, oh, well, like they're in a small group together, like, I don't know, hopefully you don't feel like I forced you guys to be in a group together, but like there was a space for them to like grow and nurture a relationship with each other as they're following Jesus, right? And maybe for some of us, you may look at or hear their stories and be like, yeah, like that's great for them, but maybe that's not for me. Like God doesn't have me in a relationship or whatever, but that's a total lie, because God has made each and every one of us for intimate relationship with Him and with one another. That's how He created all of us. And in the Garden of Eden, there was such intimacy between God and man. And then when sin came, there was a distance that was created that replaced that intimacy. And I think that's continued even in where we're at now. There's this draw towards disconnect or distance rather than this intimacy that we've all been designed and fashioned to have. And that can be definitely between parent and child, it can be family, but I think like for friendship, there's nothing weird or awkward that about being in a close relationship with another sister, you know, or a man with a brother. You know, it's a beautiful thing, and it is that gift that Kevin mentioned in the beginning of just friendship. And I really want to encourage us to really just think about and consider some of these things today as you look through this model friendship in the Word. And specifically to the church, when I was talking about different hurts or offenses, you know, I believe that if you're in the place where God has called you to be, I think the enemy can try to do whatever and use offense to take us out or to make us leave. And I wouldn't want any of us to take that bait and to just be like, okay, I'm out of here, because I believe that, you know, God has all placed us here for a reason, beyond whatever, you know, we may think in our own way. But yeah, don't take the bait of that, and don't just leave if you have anything that is against another person or whatever, because as I was looking at offense, there's this thing that plants go through that I want to share, and it's called transplant shock. And when you uproot a plant too many times, you're actually stunting its growth and maybe even making it die faster if you uproot it. I think that's right. Is that right, Ken? Maybe. I meant to ask you that. And it's called a shock. The plant goes into shock, and the growth of it can decrease and even cause it to die and it won't bloom. And so I think, like, for many of us, whether we've had an experience like Belle where you'd be like, you know, like, this may not suit me, or there's something going on, like, I'm just gonna leave. There's instances, you know, where God may call you to another place, and that's fine. But if it's due to anything that you feel like, oh, well, that's not my style, or if you do have an offense against a church or a person, I would really urge you to, like, get before the Lord and ask forgiveness, and to, you know, talk it out, and to not let offense or unforgiveness really have its way in your own heart or in a relationship. So I want to invite us just to consider those things as we look at going deeper in friendship and developing a sense of more authentic community, and ultimately this culture of honor, right? It's really putting other people before yourselves. And the greatest model, obviously, is Jesus, who said that, you know, he no longer calls us friends or servants, but friends, right? And John 15 says, greater love has nothing like this than to lay down his life for his friends. And that's the ultimate picture of sacrifice, I think, but also as a friend, that God has given us his love in each and every one of us, and he calls us to love each other with that same love that he's put in us. So I want to just ask us to consider whatever the Lord may be speaking to you about through the story of David and Jonathan, or the things that I shared, and even from what the girls shared in their own lives, and just ask God, you know, if there's anything that we need to sort out with another person or with him, and we'll just have some time of just heart check before him. So can I ask the team to come up and play something? Thanks. You say that you set the lonely in family. God, and I thank you, Lord, that you've made us each created for relationship, for intimacy with you, God, and one another, Lord. God, I just pray, Lord, for anyone who may feel isolated or even have a sense of loneliness, Lord God, of not belonging, Lord, that God, you would just even now assure them that they're not only welcome in your family, but they're welcome here, God, and that you have such rich relationships around them, God. Lord, we just even turn to you right now, God, and we thank you for being a God who pursues us, who's closed that gap and distance between us, Lord, that we can have such a deep and personal relationship with you. And God, that we don't walk alone in this life or this journey, but that you have people around us, brothers and sisters, to really share life with, God. And I pray that you would tend to people's hearts who may feel like they have gotten it wrong or even have hurts that they've carried. I pray that they would just be able to release that and almost even to receive your love, your grace in their lives, God. Thank you, Lord, that you set us in family. Thank you, God, for connection and for covenant relationships for every member of this body, God. Would you encourage us to seek out a deeper level and not settle for just this surface level or put my best on in front of people Sundays, but to really dig in and be authentic and real and even vulnerable with each other, Lord. Thank you, God, that you would do this new thing in us as you establish us, as you root us in you and your love, God, that we can be real before you and open ourselves up to those around us.